Thank you very much for coming. Today we have Shazreh Hussain with us, who is a gender and Islamic scholar, a humanist, a human rights activist, and above all, a Sufi. So today we have an opportunity to try and look at faith and try and better understand some of the issues that the Islamic Republic and those who live here are perhaps under the misconception of. And this is an endeavor to continue to learn more and also to continue to educate ourselves as we grow and evolve in a civilized society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I thought that I would take as my starting point a question that I found on the Kuch Khaas website where this event was announced. So someone had asked, who is Shazreh Hussain? And that made me think, yes, who am I? Who am I to stand here and speak to all of you about gender in Islam and unreading patriarchal interpretations of the Quran? I haven't been to Islamic University, I haven't been to Al-Azhar, I haven't been to Qom, so who am I to do this? And my response to that is that I'm speaking to you in my capacity as a believing Muslim woman. And I think that if we are individually accountable for our beliefs, for our actions, then we have to be individually accountable for our beliefs. And it is the right and duty of every Muslim man and woman to reflect on, understand, and interpret the religious texts. And what is more, I will be as bold as to say that all of us have an equal right to interpret, reflect on, and understand the holy texts. This was a right that was recognized in the early days of Islam. And I'd like to just relate to you an anecdote from the Caliphate of Hazrat Umar, Raziyallahu Ta'ala anha. Hazrat Umar heard that the meher, as you know, the gift that meher, usko haq meher hum kehte hain, उन्होंने ये सुना कि हक मेहर जो है, parents are demanding very large mehers, and it is preventing men from getting married, from women from getting married. So he fixed an amount. But in that day and age, although he was one of the closest companions of the Prophet, there was a tradition, a democratic tradition, of consulting with the Muslim Ummah on such matters which were not 100% clear in the Quran. So he held an assembly, and you will be happy to know to this assembly were invited men and women, young and old. And one of the women there, an old woman, stood up and said, Umar, you have no right to set this limit on the meher, because in the Quran it says that even if you have given a treasure in meher, you ought not to take it back. And Hazrat Umar accepted what she said and removed that limit, which clearly, and he didn't say, I mean, can you imagine that happening today? Because as time has gone on, what has happened is that there is a group of people over the years, and there have been different groups of people, who have decided that the interpretation of religious texts is just their business, and they have vested interests in doing that, and they have jealously guarded that right. The hopeful thing is that today I think that right is being reclaimed, and there are Muslim men and women leading movements for justice and equality, gender justice and equality, who are not from among the traditional, those recognized as the traditional Muslim scholars. So I started this study about 10 years ago. I work as a freelance development consultant, and I realized that there was a whole set of beliefs that was limiting women's opportunities, that was resulting in a lower status for them, and that this set of beliefs, it became painfully clear, was rooted in what people considered to be Islam. So I started looking at this issue. I have read reformist scholars, I have read traditional scholars on this issue, and I have incorporated it into the gender training that I do as a development consultant, and I have also taught a course on gender and Islam at the Quaid-e-Azam University. So I would like to share with you 6 key tenets which I feel are used not only in Pakistan but also elsewhere to demean women. One is that Eve was created from Adam's rib and she was responsible for the banishment from heaven. So she's a secondary and inferior creation. Adam was created for Allah and Eve was created for Adam. And there is something inherently immoral about women because they, after all, were responsible for the fall and the exit from heaven, which would not otherwise have happened. Then we are told that the Quran says that men are qawamun over women. Qawamun, in charge of, rulers of, managers of women. And therefore, naturally, it wouldn't be so if women were equally. Is that an echo?
No,
Okay.
think there's a recording.
All right. So this would not be the case if women were equally intelligent, equally moral. Then, of course, we have what has been converted into a law in Pakistan, that the witness of 2 women is equal to that of 1 man. Adi gawahi hai. Then that women have never been recipients of wahi. Had God considered them equal, God would have spoken to them sometime directly. So God hasn't, so obviously that's another proof that is cited. And finally, that women should remain within the 4 walls of the house, and that they really have no right to be appearing in public spaces. And if they must appear in public spaces, if it becomes indispensable or zaruri for some reason, then they must be fully covered. They mustn't be seen, and then that goes back and relates to this whole idea of woman as fitna. Because the minute you see her, and the minute men see her, they are compelled to do what is immoral and evil. So let me first ask you, I'm going to ask you one by one, whether you also have heard this. Number 1, that the Quran says that Eve is created from Adam's rib and she's responsible for the banishment from heaven. So how many of you have heard this? Okay. Generally heard this, or you feel that, or you think this is part of the Islamic belief system?
I don't think it's part of the Islamic belief system. I think it's more
Okay. Okay, but how many people think that it is also part of the, frankly and honestly, the part of our belief system?
it was an inherited notion from the earlier religion.
Okay. That men are qawamun over women.
Yes.
How many people? Okay. In charge of, superior to, rulers of?
Head of the family.
Well, that the Quran, what I'm asking you is a fairly specific question right now. Have you heard that this is what the Quran says? Yes? Okay. That husbands have a right to beat disobedient wives. That 2 women are equal to 1 man as witness.
We have that in law.
That women have never been recipients of wahi. Yes. And that they should remain within the 4 walls of the house if possible, and are required to cover themselves up completely if they are to be seen in public space. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now I shall be presenting to you on some of these issues, because I think it will be a challenge even to address 3 issues in 1 hour, but I will try my best. So I am going to be presenting to you three issues out of this. 1, the creation and banishment from paradise. 2nd, the issue of qawamun. And 3rd, the issue of whether husbands have a right to beat disobedient wives. I'll be sharing with you the traditional and the reformist or progressive view on this. But before I do that, I'd just like to make a few points overall on how we approach the Quran and how we approach what is or is not in Islam. And I would really urge you, next time anybody tells you that this is in Islam, to ask them what they mean. Do they mean it is in the Quran? Do they mean that it is some hadith? Do they mean that it is a ruling of the fuqaha? Or do they mean they found it in a book written by a Sufi saint? It's very important to know the source, because it is only then that you can begin to investigate. And not all sources are equal. Okay. The other thing, if you could move it to the next slide, I want to say is, because this often in my work people find very disturbing. There are several interpretations of every verse, and the Quran itself tells us that they are. In Surah Zumar it says, those who listen to the word and follow the best in it, those are the ones whom God has guided, and those are the ones endued with understanding. So it's obviously also possible to read and follow something else. And when we speak about the best, what can that be? Because when we have these various interpretations, we need to evaluate them for ourselves. Because how will we do what is right if we don't believe what is right? So what could be the criteria for the best? Next slide. I would submit to you that surely the best must have to do with basic Quranic values, which any Muslim, and basically I think any human being, would recognize as spiritual values. Adal, Musawa, Muwadda, Rehma and Karama. Justice, equality, love, compassion and human dignity. So surely this will help us. This will guide us when we are choosing between different interpretations. Let's go to the next slide. Also, it is important to understand that any interpretation, any translation, is just one attempt, one human attempt to understand the infinite wisdom of Allah. As Hazrat Ali said, and he was speaking to the Kharijis who said the matter is referred to Allah and his apostle, meaning that what they read in the Quran and what they understood was exactly what God meant. And Hazrat Ali said, the mighty and glorious Allah declared that if you dispute about anything, refer it to Allah and his apostle. However, this is the Quran, written in straight lines between two boards of its binding. It does not speak with the tongue. It needs interpreters, and interpreters are people. Are people with their own set of beliefs, living at a certain time, bound by the context that they live in, as we are today also. Okay, next. And the other important thing to understand is that the Quran is eternally relevant. But if we are to understand how it is relevant to us today, we have to understand the historical context. If we don't understand the historical context, we cannot understand how to apply the principle to new situations that we confront today and that Muslims have been confronting. And this is recognized even by sort of more conservative scholars. For example, Maududi says, the Quran is vitally related to the taste and temperament, the environment and history and custom and usages of Arabia. Sayyid Qutb says, the Quran took the Arab society step by step as it stumbled and got up again. So these are, we don't have enough time available, but whenever we look at any interpretation, we have to see what is the hermeneutics, what are the principles of interpretation. And another one I would suggest is this, that we have to look at the Quran as a coherent text. Therefore, if we are looking at a verse on witness, in one place, let's see how that subject has been dealt with in other places. If we are looking at the relationship between a husband and a wife, let's see all the places in the Quran which talk about that relationship. And let's come up with a coherent view, not just take little bits and pieces of the text and base an entire interpretation on one small part. Okay. So now let's come to the very fundamental question of, are men and women created equal? Because if men and women are not created equal, then we can forget about it. The first one. So this, God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner. So God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs, closed up its place with the flesh and the rib that God had taken from the man. He made it into a woman and brought her to the man. So where is this from? The Bible. But you would be surprised. 99% of the people I speak to believe that this is what the Quran says. Next slide, please. Let us look at what the Quran has to say. First, let me begin by telling you that the Quran discusses creation in more than 30 places. In most of those places, Adam is not mentioned. It talks about creation in pairs. हमने तुमको जोड़ों में बनाया. We created you in pairs. In Surah Nisa, this is the first verse of Surah Nisa, let's examine what the Quran has to say about creation. Humaira, would you like to read it out? Okay. Before I take you to the translations, I want to point certain things out to you. So basically this says, Ya ayyuhan nasu, and as we all know, nas is everyone, all human beings. Ya ayyuhan nasu taku rabbukumul lazi khalaqakum min nafsin wahidatin. O people, have taqwa, and I think that is best translated as God consciousness, though most Urdu translations say daro, Rab se daro. So, O people, have taqwa towards your Rab who created you from nafse wahidatin. Let's look at this word. Nafs has been translated as Jaan in Urdu, as soul, as person, as human being, as living entity, even as a single cell. Now, nafs is neither male nor female, conceptually speaking. You'd use nafs whether you were talking about a man or a woman. So the first creation, Allah has not chosen to speak about it in a gendered way. Now Arabic is a language which has, everything has a gender. So then maybe there's a clue there, in the grammatical gender, maybe that'll give us a clue. So what do you think the grammatical gender of nafs wahidatiyun is? It's feminine. So I'm not saying we have to go there, but I'm saying if we want to go there, the grammatical gender is feminine. وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. Minha. Ji. Minha is a word which can mean of the same nature, of the same species, or extracted from. It has both meanings. Let us acknowledge that. So, yeah. From, yeah, minha. Zawjaha. Now let's not confuse this with the Urdu zawj, which is wife. Zawjaha in Arabic does not mean wife. It means spouse. It is neither male nor female conceptually. So let us understand that in the place where the Quran talks in greatest detail about creation, Allah does not choose to do it in a gender specific manner. Now let's go on and look at, and from that we spread men and women. Let's go on and look at some of the translations that have been done. This is Muhammad Asad, one of the most widely read translations. And it says, O mankind, be conscious of your sustainer who has created you out of one living entity, and out of it created its mate, and of the two spread abroad a multitude of men and women. Next. Abdullah Yusuf Ali, the most widely read translation. Reverence your guardian Lord who created you from a single person, created of like nature, his mate, and from them twain scattered seeds, countless women and men. Next. मौलाना अमीन इस्लाही, ए लोगो अपने रब से डरो जिसने तुमको एक ही जान से पैदा किया और उसी की जिन्स से उसका जोड़ा पैदा किया और उन दोनों से बहुत सारे मर्द और औरतें फैला दें. नेक्स्ट. दिस इज़ मौलाना शबीर अहमद उस्मानी, तफसीर उस्मानी, and Maulana Maududi, Tafhimul Quran, and you can see that it is similar. Nafs is Jan or Zoj is Joda in both. So no one in translating this, no matter what their views, no one can add gender to this. No one can assign a gender to the first creation. And surely there must be a reason for it. Yet, 90%, if not 99%, Muslims believe that if you ask them on the streets or even in drawing rooms, they will tell you that Eve was created from Adam's rib and is a secondary creation, and therefore women have a lower status. The word rib is nowhere in the Quran. Interestingly, the word Hawa is nowhere in the Quran. It just says Adam's partner. So the one question we can ask ourselves is, how did this happen? Why and how did this happen? It happened because some of the earliest commentaries that we have on the Quran, Tafsir Tabari, and onwards from there, Fakhruddin Razi, Zamakhshari, Ibn Kasir, all these people took the biblical account and put that into the tafsir as an explanation of this verse, as giving the detail that this verse had omitted. And a lot of stories from Qasasul Anbiya, which is a collection of stories about prophets, also entered the Muslim consciousness through these tafasir. And in fact, the ijma of the scholars, the consensus of the scholars pretty much till the 18th century was that Eve had been created out of Adam's rib. It only changed in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century, when people like the Grand Mufti of Egypt, Mufti Muhammad Abdu, said that we are not going to use Israeliyat to explicate the Quran. The Quran clearly shows that men and women are created equal. They have equal human capacities and they are equal as human beings. Even then, some scholars persisted in holding the contrary view. But I'm pleased to tell you that today, if you look at the most respected Sunni and Shia scholars, you look at even Maulana Maududi, Javed Ghamdi, Tadabburul Quran ke Maulana Amin Islahi, You look at the Shia scholars, Allama Tabatabai, Ayatollah Jawadi Amli, Murtaza Mutahiri, all of them will say that yes, men and women are created equal. So this is something we must understand, that at one point there was an ijma of scholars, they are all reading the same Quran, and they said women and men are not equal. But today, most will say women and men are created equal. Then there's other stuff that happens, but we'll look at that. Now let's come to the issue of the exile from heaven. Who was responsible? Who's responsible for getting the human race kicked out of paradise? Hawa. Satan, yes, but who did Satan talk to? Both? Yes?
Neither man nor the woman.
Uh-huh.
They both were not aware of their gender till they.
Okay. That's a very interesting point. Well, it is mentioned in all these places in the Quran. The references are there: Surah Baqarah, Surah Araf, Surah Hijr, Surah Taha, Surah Sa'd. The event is discussed: the prostration of the angels and then the exile from heaven. So in 4 out of these 5 places, it says both of them listened to Satan. But in one place, I have to admit, it speaks only about one person. That this person's resolve was weak, this person listened to Satan, and this person disobeyed God, and as a result, both of them had to leave. So who is that one person? It's Adam. So the only place in which only one person is mentioned, and it doesn't say both did this, both did that, the only place there, Adam is the one who's singled out, not his spouse. Yet, again, you ask 99.9% of the people here or in other Muslim countries, and they will say, and not only them, again, when we come to the ijma of the scholars, this was the ijma of the scholars. That Adam was not responsible, it was Eve who really deceived him and enticed him into believing what Satan said. And it's very interesting because you start with Tafsir Tabari, and when you look at Tafsir Tabari, there Tabari still says that Wallahu Alam. You know, this is the story told by the people of the Torah, but you know, God knows best. However, after saying God knows best, he goes on to say that Eve was responsible, and that is why, because she plucked a fruit from a tree and it was bleeding, that is why women have to suffer menstruation. That is why it is a curse. They are cursed with menstruation, pregnancy, and with pregnancy which takes them to the door of death, as it did in those days and in some of our countries even to this day. Then you had other scholars holding forth on this topic, and I believe it's Zamakhshari who says that when Adam died, the angels gathered around his deathbed to give him his last rites of passage, his ghusl, and when Eve tried to come near him, they didn't let her because she was responsible for the fall. And Ibn Kasir says that this is all Israeliyat, but then goes on to tell us how Satan fell in Isfahan, how Bibi Hawa fell either in Jeddah or Marwa, and how I think Adam falls in India somewhere. Well, according to Ibn Kasir, it's somewhere in India. So this is how acts of interpretation influence our beliefs and then our practices. Ji, we'll proceed. Now let's look at this other issue. Are men superior to women? Because it's not laid to rest. If you think that because all the scholars now agree that women are and men are created equal and therefore this issue is laid to rest about men and women's relative superiority, it is not. Because then they argue that yes, created equal, but with different capacities. And one gender being emotionally, intellectually, well, when they put it politely, they say adapted to, created for housework and caregiving, whereas the other gender was created for leadership. And there is, some will just talk about it as difference, and others will talk about it in terms of deficiencies. Morally, emotionally, intellectually deficient. So let's look at one of the verses that is often quoted in support. Ji. Humaira, pardon. Yes, they found this verse. Of all the verses, they found this verse. Yeah, it's partially there. The complete verse isn't there because first we are going to focus on the first half of it, which has to do with the superiority issue. Then we'll focus on the second half, which has to do with the wife beating issue. So this we are going to follow a slightly different tack. Let's go straight to the translations. Here's Muhammad Asad. Men shall take full care of women with the bounties which God has bestowed more abundantly on the former than on the latter, and with what they may spend out of their possessions. And the righteous women are the truly devout ones who guard the intimacy which God has ordained to be guarded. Next. This is Muhammad Baqir Behboodi, not a very popular translation of the Quran, but a translation nevertheless, which I found, which combines translation and exegesis, yani ke tarjuma or tafsir together, right? And this really illustrates how people bring their own prejudice, etc., to the text. I'm going to read it out because I know some people can't see the screen. Men are the protectors of their women, for they surpass them in strength, intellectual acumen, and social skills. A male doctor is better than a female doctor, and so on and so forth. This is, the translation and text are mixed here, right? So this, anyone who's reading it is feeling like they're reading the Quran.
This is not translation, it is commentary.
This is translation and commentary combined in this particular...
Have been changed. The Quranic word has been changed.
Yes.
If the Quranic word has been changed, that's commentary, not the translation.
But I am trying to tell you that this particular text combines the two and calls itself an exegetical translation of the Quran. This is what I'm trying to tell you. I agree with that. Furthermore, men are the protectors and maintainers of their women, for it is the men who must provide dowries and support their women financially throughout their married life. Therefore, it is incumbent on righteous women that they obey their husbands, and when their husbands are absent, they must, with God as their aid, strive to protect their reputations and do nothing to shame them. Next. This is Dr. Farooq, unko Allah Jannat Bakshe. He's been killed. He was a scholar, a very progressive scholar, Mardan se the. He says, men as husbands, because remember in the Quranic text, we'll go back to it, it just says rijal, which means men, have the responsibilities as protectors of women because Allah has made one, sometimes man and sometimes woman, superior to the other. So here the reason is that men have spent their wealth on women. Next. मर्द हाकिम हैं औरतों पर, इस वास्ते कि बड़ाई दी अल्लाह ने एक को एक पर और इस वास्ते के खर्च करते हैं अपना माल, फिर जो औरतें नेक हैं सो ताबेदार हैं, निगहबानी करती हैं पीठ पीछे अल्लाह की हिफाजत से. So we have a whole range of interpretations. what is this really based on? Some key words. Next. Qawamun. Now, in Arabic, as in any other language, words have a range of meanings. Qawamun can mean guardians, it can mean responsible for, it can mean take care of, it can mean simply supporter. Qawamun comes from the same word as qaim karna, support karna. Or it can mean ruler. It can mean ruler. Fadl, the other key word here, can mean someone has a rank, a higher rank. It can also just mean bounties, favors, nemte. Qanitat, this is very interesting because this word, and these are all taken from a dictionary of Arabic usage. Qanitat is very interesting because nowhere in the Quran is qanitat used for anything but to speak about devoutness, a human being's relationship with God. The word devout, one is only devout towards God. One can be obedient to different people, but one cannot be devout to anyone else. You can be devoted, but you can't be devout. So, but interestingly, when it is, and in the verse for believing Muslim women and believing Muslim men and those who fast and those who give in charity, where there's that equation between men and women, again it talks about the qanitat and the qanitin. So the devout women and the devout men. But in this particular context, some translators, to support their theory, have translated this as obedient to husband. So that's another interesting thing. Let's go back now to the Arabic text. Okay. I just want to point out to you what it says here. Ar-Rijal, which means men. Qawamun, the word we discussed. Al-Nisa, that's women. Bima Fadlallah, with the fazl of Allah, which could mean rank, it could simply mean bounties. Ba'dahum ala ba'dyum, again no gender specified. Some over others, as Allah has given bounties or even rank, whatever you may say, to some over others. It does not indicate here that it is men over women. There's no, it's not inflected for gender. Fasalihatu qanitatun, and the women who are saleh and who are devout. Guide hafizatul lil ghaib bima hafizallah. यहाँ फिर आपको किसी मर्द का या मियाँ का या किसी का जिक्र नहीं मिलता, अरबी में नहीं मिलता. Now let's go to the first translation. If you go to Muhammad Asad's translation of it, is there any sense that you get here of men being rulers over women? It simply says that men shall take full care of women. And here it's not husbands. It's all men in their different capacities should take full care of women, because it was one of the realities, and I'm afraid continues to be one, that men have more resources. So they should in every way, not just, we are not talking, with their resources, they should look after the women in their lives. And in fact, even women who are not directly related to them. जी हाँ yes yes yes, there is that possibility also. Thank you very much for pointing it out, that this word rijal, just like in English mankind refers to everybody, rijal can refer to everybody. Left? Okay. I'm reminded that there are 15 minutes left. So again, off to 7:30? So I want to leave some time for discussion. Okay. So I'm just going to, it's not possible to exhaustively deal here with each and every issue, but I just want to point out to you that it's also a question of looking at a range of interpretations and seeing what motivates these interpretations and what are the effects of these interpretations on our actions. And I mean, there's a lot of reflection that one can do over this, that could Allah possibly be saying that all men, irrespective of merit, irrespective of their moral character, all men or even all husbands are rulers of wives. But typically the conservative argument is that a family is like a state or like an organization which has to have a head. That head obviously has to be a man, and everyone else is there to, has to obey him. Of course, he should consult them or whatever. He shouldn't be mean to them, but he is the head. They haven't heard of teamwork, it seems. Okay. Ji? Wife beating. Okay, let me quickly go to wife beating then. Let's go. Okay, so these are issues for you to investigate further. And anyone who's interested, if you give me your email, I can send you a reading list. Okay, let's go further. Just a thing about the other verses about marriage, where Allah Ta'ala says that you are, about husband and wife, that you are garments for each other. Where there's again no indication of one being superior to the other. Ji. So does a husband have permission to beat his wife? So let's go to the text. And what I've done here is I have substituted, this is actually from Amina Wadood Mohsin, where she has substituted some of the key words, left them in Arabic. So again, this is the same verse we've already looked at, but as you can see the last 3 lines, as for those from whom you fear nushuz, admonish them, then leave them alone in bed, then darabu them. So what is darabu? First of all, of course, there's a whole discussion of what does nushuz mean. And traditional scholars will say a disobedient wife. But this very word is also used for a man later in the same, in Surah Nisa. So what does it mean there? No, there it doesn't mean a disobedient husband. There then it means other things. Okay, anyway, but I'll leave that because we've got very little time and I want to leave some time for questions. Ji, next. So Muhammad said, and as for those women whose ill will you have reason to fear, admonish them first, then leave them alone in bed, then beat them. And if thereupon they take heed, do not seek to harm them. Behold, God is indeed most high, great. So darabu here is translated as to beat. In his commentary, Muhammad Asad points out that the Prophet, and he uses these words, intensely detested those who beat their wives. Wife beating, sorry. And there are several traditions, several ahadith from several sources on this, on how the Prophet forbade this to be done. However, he says that this verse came, and many Islamic scholars consider it, like Al-Shafi, consider it barely permissible, and it's more like a token with a handkerchief or a maswak to indicate displeasure. This is Muhammad Asad. Next. Now this is Ahmad Ali's translation. And as for women you feel are averse, talk to them suasively, leave them alone in bed, and he takes that to mean that don't molest them if you are having a quarrel with each other, and go to bed with them, as in when they are willing. If they open out to you, do not seek an excuse for blaming them. He translates darabu here as consensual sexual intercourse. Next. Lale Bakhtiar, this is the first complete translation of the Quran by a woman, the Sublime Quran. She says, men are supporters of wives because God I'm not going to read that. Let's just come to the last verses. But those whose resistance you fear, as in those who become nushuz, admonish them, abandon them in their sleeping places, then go away from them. And if they obey you, surely look not for any way against them. So Lale Bakhtiar translates the word darabu as going away. Next. So if you look at the Arab English dictionary of Quranic usage, now I'm not even talking about the whole range of words, of meanings that this word has in Arabic, I'm talking about the range it has within the Quran. You will find it can mean all these things. It can mean beating, it can mean striking, it can mean to travel, to go away. I will just sum up by sharing with you Lale Bakhti, and I have read translations. I think it was Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi, जिसमें वो कह फरमाते हैं कि अगर और ये यहाँ तक बात पहुँच जाए तो मारा जावे, खूब मारा जावे, हड्डी ना टूटने पावे, ज़ख्म नज़र ना आवे, मगर उसके अलावा मारा जावे. So ये भी there's a whole range of interpretations. जी हाँ जी 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 आप पढ़िए जी. Okay, we'll wrap up. All I want to say is one last thing, that Lale Bakhtiar says that surely the best exemplar of the Quranic principles is the Prophet. The Prophet had arguments with his wives. He was in fact once so angry that he left for a month. If this is what, why should not we interpret darabu to mean to go away, when that is the sunnah, that is what the Prophet did? Why should we interpret it to mean to beat? Because this is an imperative. If they do this, you beat them. If you think it's beat. If he never followed it, then that is not a valid interpretation. Next, last. Finally, just this. There can only be one criterion for any human being's superiority over anybody else according to the Quran, and that is taqwa. Nothing else. If you think about it, nothing related to this world and your existence here, including your gender, can be a criterion for anybody's superiority over anybody else. And finally, the Quran's vision of gender. Could you ji move the slide? Gender relations. Verily believing women and men are protectors of each other. Protectors of each other, remember. Not men are protectors of women. They command what is good, prohibit what is immoral, and they perform the salat, give zakat, obey Allah and His Messenger. Allah shall have mercy on them. Truly, Allah is Almighty, wise.
Thank you, Shazreh Appa. And just to put this in context, we have a domestic violence bill pending in Parliament. And many of the discussions that are going on in Parliament are predicated on understanding many of these principles. And those who are against that particular bill are quoting Islam as being an impediment of passing that particular bill. You have two of the mainstream political parties who are using Islam as a basis on which a domestic violence bill is being labeled as un-Islamic. So understanding what our Islamic Republic professes and what exactly our faith is actually has very real consequences as citizens in this country. So it is incumbent on us, especially in the democratic dispensation, that all of us as citizens are fully aware and are very active members as Muslims, practicing or non-practicing, but certainly aware of what this faith actually says, because it has huge consequences in law and in our society. So we open up to questions. I will take a bunch of questions at the same time, so Shazreh Appa can address them at the same time, okay?
This is more of a comment to begin with. Why don't we have people who are going to be, the parliamentarians who are going to be involved in the lawmaking part of this panel discussion? Because if you're preaching to the converted, I think it's just a reinforcement of what we already believe in. And also another, sort of argument against the, structural discrimination against against women is also because, if they are going to subject to equal punishment, and if they have azab और सवाब उनके लिए बराबर है और सज़ा भी बराबर है, तो फिर उनको inferior क्यों समझते हैं? सज़ा तो नहीं आधी मिलती मगर witness आधी.
Just for my own understanding, I want to ask that if we take one example of are men allowed to beat their wives, even in the first interpretation, there is still this inherent message or insinuation exactly that if your wife is misbehaving or you fear your wife for whatever reason, no shoes, exactly, do this, go away, leave her alone. But then surely a truly egalitarian reading of the Quran should also say that the following verse, or if not the preceding verse, should also be that if your husband is misbehaving, leave him alone in bed as well. Why don't we get that out of it?
I must say it was a very good lecture. What I am confused with so many meanings and interpretation of Quran and Quranic verses. It's like mom ki naak jisne chahe jidhar mod di. For God's sake, don't we have any better things to do, honest to God? Women are better than men. I am a man, I accept that, and my mother brought me to this world and she was an excellent lady, and I think every woman is the same.
To address your question, which is a very valid one, if you remember when I started this, I made a point about the understanding the historical context of the Quran. And we cannot forget that it is revealed in 7th century Arabia. And if you study that context, I mean, for example, some people have argued that this is not a permission to be violent, this is containing violence that was rampant. Because it is saying, don't go straight to beating. Even those who think that it does say beating, that don't go straight to that. So it is a highly patriarchal society. And that color, as even Maulana Maududi points out, that color does come in. But then if you study the entire Quran and you study the entire world view, and if you study the attributes of God, you understand that allowing that this is addressed to those people. For example, the institution of slavery was not abolished. But is there any doubt in our mind today that that was the direction in which a Muslim society had to go? So I think with gender it is something similar that happens. Concept of single woman. I think that is not an issue of the belief system in Islam. That is again the victimization of single women is an issue of highly patriarchal societies. But we do have, as Humaira was pointing out, the example of Hazrat Aisha, who was very independent, lived an independent life, and several others. Believe me, there are so many. Bibi Khatija before she married, but there are in fact, Poppy has written a book on Muslim women. There are amazing role models in history, and who were respected. I mean, things seem to have even gotten worse. Who were respected although they were single. There was no Rabia Adawiyah, the great Sufi mystic. She never married. So we have many role models. It's more in the practice than in the theory that.
How many role models can you count?
जी, let me नहीं जी नहीं आप 2 किताबें पढ़ लें और वो फिर बात बताएं. No, हाँ, hundreds.
1 lakh.
हाँ जी.
How many women have passed away till the revelation of Quran and now?
What is the point here?
This is wrong concept. What you are telling them. Hazrat Aisha was not allowed to remarry by Allah in Quran.
देखिए वो तो बात ही नहीं हो रही. बात ये नहीं हो रही है. आप समझे नहीं शायद.
नहीं,
आप क्या रहे हैं जी?
मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूँ जो आप कह रहे हैं सिंगल वुमेन जो कॉन्सेप्ट है कि वुमेन कैन लिव अलोन. Where it is written in Quran that woman can live alone?
Where is it written in the Quran that she can't?
मैरी का कुरान में कई दफा आया है.
क्या है?
निकाह करें.
मैरी का आया है कि निकाह करें?
जी, मर्द जो है निकाह करें और तुम्हारे
नहीं, मैरी as in अच्छा, I thought you were talking about Mary. Mary. No, that there's a Quran. देखिए, that there's a Quranic injunction to marry does not mean that a woman cannot be single or a man cannot be single. Some of our greatest spiritual role models in terms of men and women, बीबी मरियम, हाँ बीबी मरियम जिनका जो स्पिरिचुअल स्टेटस है वो ऐसा है कि बयान से बाहर जी,
फिर बीबी मरियम की तरह होना चाहिए। ये मैं आपको एक बात बता दूं,
आपका पॉइंट भी मुझे समझ आ रहा है।
आपने कहा ना सिंगल वुमन कॉन्सेप्ट जो है
जी, मैंने ये कहा जी, मैं एक बात अगर मैं ज़रा रीस्टेट कर दूं, शायद मैं अपनी बात नहीं समझा सकी आपको। मैं सिर्फ ये कह रही हूँ, अगर मैं उसको फिर से कहूँ कि इस्लाम में हर इंसान ना सिर्फ मुसलमान की मुकम्मल इज़्ज़त और एहतराम है, चाहे उनकी शादी हुई हो या उनकी शादी ना हुई हो। उनके एहतराम में या उनके इंसान होने में या लायके इज़्ज़त होने में कोई कमी नहीं आती। बस इतनी सी बात है, और कुछ।
Well, I really want to thank you for your perspective, and I think what you're doing is using your intellect, which Allah tells us to do, and that I think the best of Muslims do, because they challenge, they think, and they love Allah with their intellect, and that's what you're doing. So thank you so much for your genuineness and for your contribution. But I just wanted to say very quickly that I think there's often a mixture of people mix up religion and culture and the ideal and norms, and that's what people are confused about. So that's one thing you can clarify. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your lecture. It's been very inspiring and enlightening. My question is that given the situation that's there in our country, where there are multiple interpretations and where the predominant interpretation is that men are superior and that they can, commit violence and many other things. What should we do? What should be the course of action to, besides having such sort of presentations, and besides perhaps compiling this sort of explanation, how else can we spread this enlightenment? And because where often even translations are not read, only the Arabic is read. So and in schools also Islamiyat is read, taught in a very sort of basic and primitive way. So what should we do?
Well, I think that first of all, educate ourselves about these issues, and then I'm a great believer in dialogue. I taught at the Quaid-e-Azam University, and I have to tell you, at one stage I thought I was going to get shot. But there were people from very different backgrounds there, and there were several of them, mostly men, who came at the end of that course and had really had a change of heart, because nobody had ever really talked to them about these issues. They hadn't had the opportunity to think about it. And then, of course, I think I would say just practicing the golden rule in even in our gender relations, in every relation. Do unto others what you would like done unto you. If you just practice that one thing, then and ask people and invite people to do the same, I think a lot of this gets taken care of, even if you don't know the details.
Okay, we're going to have the last question here.
I'd just like to recommend a very interesting book. I'm sure you would have come across it, The Tao of Islam by
Sachiko Murata.
Sachiko Murata. It talks about the gender relationships
Exactly.
in not just the Quran, but all the ahadith and all the great interpreters of the Quran and ahadith.
Yes.
The comment that I'd like to make is that if we focus on taqwa,
Yes.
and we focus on tawheed,
Absolutely.
what happens is that we start moving, whether we are men or women,
Absolutely.
towards a level of growth in which we realize that maturity lies in balancing both the feminine and the masculine
Within
characteristic
yourself.
within each soul.
Yeah.
As God said, He has created each of us from one
Absolutely.
soul.
Exactly.
So as long as we learn as soon as we learn that the interplay between the Jalali
Jamali.
and the Jamali, the so-called, we use the masculine terms and the feminine names of Allah within ourselves, and we learn to balance them, as you were saying, through using the golden mean. We will never really reach Tawheed. We will always be in conflict within our own self. When we be, whether it's a woman or a man, when we try to be aggressive or use violence, we are conflicting within the inner self, not and secondary cause. We are reaching area of zulmat.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
Light.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you very much. We look forward to our next discussion. I'd like to thank Kuch Khaas and Aruba and all her team in organizing this. And Ji? 1st of June. Thank you.